Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lion's Den. Today we speak with Matthew Fornaro, who is a business law attorney. And this is a really educational episode. We basically start with the formation of a business and we talk all the way through growth, scaling, M&A, and then eventually exiting the business. And Matthew coaches us through what are all the different things that we need to keep in mind as business owners from a legal perspective as we grow our business through its entire life cycle. So super educational. He's a really smart guy. Give it a listen. Matthew, welcome to the Lion's Den.
Thank you, Nico. Thank you for having me.
Of course. You're actually the first attorney that we've had on the Lion's Den. Everyone else has been, it's been all business owners, entrepreneurs, which I guess technically you do own your own your own business. But I was excited to talk to you because I was hoping we could kind of go through the life cycle of a business and understand, what entrepreneurs need to be thinking about, careful of at each step of the way. And as I understand it, you serve business owners at any business life cycle stage. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. So then let's dig into that. So first stage, I would think, is the business formation stage, which in my experience has been pretty easy, but maybe that was just because I read a lot about it and knew what I had to do. I don't know. What, in your experience, what are the common issues that business owners face at that stage, mistakes that they make at that stage?
I would say it even starts before the formation and the pre-formation stage, because
Okay.
in pre-formation, you should have a written business plan.
Mm-hmm.
And the written business plan should be the outline of what your business is going to be, like what it does, who's involved with it, how you get money, how you make money, how you spend money, where you're going to get money from, if you're going to rent space, if you're going to sell things on the internet, all that stuff should be in your written business plan. And that should be before you go into actually forming the business. And that's actually useful, because if you don't have a written business plan, there's a lot of banks who won't even deal with you as far as trying to get money or anything like that. So I would start with the pre-formation with that. And then once we get to the formation, then we have your governing documents, which you want to make sure, it's very easy to just go online, for instance, where I am in Florida, to go on sunbiz.org and just click like 6 things and spend $70 and you have a business. Well, yes, legally you have a business, but not really, because you didn't do any of the foundation stuff with any of the documents or any of the things. So one of the things, once we have the written business plan that I get to with my clients, is, okay, if you're going to be, first we need to select your business organization, which I work with like their accountant and them to figure out what's the best business organization for them. And then we have to come up with the actual business organization document. So then we have to come up with the articles of incorporation, the corporate bylaws, the operation agreement, the limited partnership, whatever it is. We come up with a document, then we register the business, and the business is active.
Okay. And
so that would
if they
be
don't,
that would be like step 0 and step 1, I would say.
if they don't do that properly, if they just go and create a business for $70 or whatever, like you said, what are the possible downsides? Like, what are the bad things that could happen if they're not properly papered up from the beginning?
Well, the issue is going to be is that you're guaranteed to run into issues down the road where you're going to need those operating agreements, whether you need to go to a bank and borrow money, whether you're sued and you need to defend yourself, whether you need to go sue someone, whether one of your business associates wants to disassociate themselves from the business, whether you want to add someone to the business, whether you want to change the kind of business. So if it's not written in your governing documents, then you have no roadmap and you have no answer to very simple questions. Instead, you have to go to your state statutes or your state codes, and things are going to get very complex when it could have been simple by having, a 5-page operating agreement.
Do people ever come to you, business owners, where they're like a year into running their business and then you're like, all right, we got to go a step back and make sure we get all these proper, formation documents in place before we go any further? Does that happen to you a lot?
All the time,
Okay.
where we have to go back to the beginning, even with the written business plan. They don't even have the written business plan. And then we have
Yeah.
to kind of go back because all they did was they went online and formed their business organization. And then we have to go back and be like, okay, well, now we need to fix it and draft all the documents you should have had in place to begin with, particularly when you're working with like a business organization that has more than one person, because you have to divide the shares, divide the membership certificates, or divide the partnership. So it's not very difficult. Obviously, you can fix it at any point in time for the most part, but yeah, I get people who are way into their business who come back to me after the fact, then we kind of step back, and then we have to go back to ground zero again to start.
Yeah. And there's, I don't know, in my opinion, there's a little bit of a balance here at this stage because, I've worked with a lot of companies in very early stage like this, and they start thinking about all these ways that they can spend money. It's like, oh, let me get these software tools and let me spend money with a lawyer and getting all properly papered up. And, let me build this and build that. And it's like, you don't even have revenue yet. Like, you don't even have a business yet. You're just spending
Yeah.
money. You're just losing money. And so there is a weird, a lot of times the way I coach them at that early stage is just focus on revenue, just go get money. And then once you have that coming in, then you can get the right tools and paper up properly and, bring in other people and that sort of thing. So, but if they were to follow my advice, they would end up in a possibly risky place down the road where they didn't have the right, articles of incorporation and all that stuff. So that's
Yeah.
not lost on me, but sometimes it's tough for businesses, to do that up
Well,
front.
it is sometimes for them to get in compliance or get on the rails to do the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So now, business a little bit farther along, they're starting to generate some revenue. They're signing on customers. Maybe they're starting to talk about referral partnerships with other companies. They're procuring materials from suppliers now. They're hiring W-2s. They're hiring contractors. So I just named a lot of things, but what are the like common legal issues that business owners face at that point? What are the mistakes they're making that you really have to help them with at that phase?
Well, it's kind of a permutation of what I've already discussed and what I've helped or what I help my clients with is their documents. So when they buy
Mhm.
and sell stuff, or when they're entering into service agreements or leases or whatever, they got to have written contracts that go with it. And a lot of the time, they try to just do things it's not even a handshake because it's all virtual now. So it's all, click, send, just all automated stuff. And so you can't really operate that way because, much like you're going to need your governing documents at some point, you're going to need a contract that specifies the roles of who does what, when, where, why, how. And if they don't do that, then what are your remedies? Because otherwise, if you just sell someone something and you don't have a contract to go with it, then what was your actual role in selling it? What are their obligations in paying you? And when that's in dispute, if you have to go, get the money from them and sue them, you're going to have a much harder time than if you had a contract that says, well, I sent them this, they're supposed to send me this, they didn't do that, here's the penalty for doing that. So it's much of the time, it's just another permutation of the early stuff and making sure they have documents in place and systems and procedures to carry
Yeah.
out their business practices.
Yeah. But no, you're right. It's a lot of these like, external facing documents with third parties now, because the previous stage we talked about is really internal. It's like you need your articles of incorporation and all that. Now it's like if you have customers, you better have a customer contract. You better have, with terms and conditions and all that stuff, like you're saying. Otherwise, if you piss off a customer and they come for you, you could be in some serious trouble. Same thing with a
Correct.
vendor. With a vendor
Correct.
or a partner. It's like if you're buying things from a vendor or you have some sort of partnership where you loosely agreed to, split the earnings 50-50, and now that partner is trying to keep 80-20, but you don't have any contract in place. Now you're in a dispute. Now you're going to court where you could have just papered up on the front end.
Correct. And that's why it's a lot of preemptive problem solving and problem avoidance.
Yeah. I guess same thing with employees too, right? And I know there are companies out there that will literally bring people in. I guess you would say hire. They hire them, but there's no employment agreement, right? There's not even a job description. It's just, hey, come work for me and I'll pay you this much money a month. I mean, that seems like it could be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, at the minimum, you need to have like an employment handbook that says what all your employment policies are. Again, it's another variation of a contract. It just says, who you are, what you do, what your responsibilities are, what your employees' responsibilities are, all your policies, so that if something happens, you can point to it in a book and say, here's our written policy that you acknowledge that you violated and things like that. And then if possible, also have an employment contract itself that just backs up your employee handbook that just specifies more things. And it protects both sides too. It's not just the employer, it's the employee too, because it spells out what the employer's roles and responsibilities and procedures are, so that if the employer doesn't follow through with it, then the employee has remedies as well.
Yeah. And I've been lucky enough so far, I'm going to knock on wood here, to not have had to go through a lawsuit. And I had, with my clients, I give them super generous terms. Everything's month to month. I don't try to lock anybody into anything. I think that helps me out a little bit. But I mean, you obviously have, gone through litigation for your clients. Like, what is that like? I mean, how do you deal with that? What is that? What should people expect if they are about to go through litigation on something like this with a customer or with an employee?
Well, from my mindset, obviously, me personally, it doesn't really faze me because I've been doing it for over 20 years and I've seen a lot of stuff and I know what to do. But obviously, if that's not your profession and you're just a business owner, or you run a business or an employee or whatever, and you're involved in a lawsuit, obviously, that's a big mental block in your head of something that you're going to think about that could overwhelm you, whether in your, not even in your business life, in your personal life as well, just thinking about your lawsuit and your issues. So I try to, counsel my client and be like, look, if you're in business long enough, it doesn't matter how great you are. It doesn't matter what systems and documents you have in place or whatever. Something's going to happen where you're either going to have to sue someone or you're going to get sued. And it could be totally not your fault, or it could just be one of those things that happens. So I try to, comfort them and tell them that it's a process, that, here's generally a roadmap of what's going to happen, but there's no guarantees, because it's all, as much as you would hope it's objective, much of it is subjective. So I kind of lay out their expectations and I try to lay out a timeline. And then I go through like what their responsibilities are as a litigant, as far as how they have to respond to discovery when people ask questions and request documents. You can't just blow it off. On how you may have to be deposed, on how, you have to work with me to come up with all your pleadings and everything. I can only do so much from surmising what you tell me stuff. Like we have to, go back and forth. Like I have to show you a draft of things and you have to approve it and things like that. So I try to, relieve their stress just at the concept of it being in a lawsuit themselves. And I try to plan out and I tell them what's going to happen, even though most of the time you can kind of predict conceptually what's going to happen from beginning to end, but sometimes you can't. And that's why, you just got to take it as it comes.
Yeah. What are what are the most common like litigation sort of things that you have to deal with? I mean, is it employment? Is it customer disagreements? Like what does it tend to be?
It's, it's a variety of things. It's business partners, and I use that term lightly because that's a legal term, but people just use the term partners even though it's incorrect. Partners get in disputes and they don't know how to resolve it. Clients get in disputes with you, employees get in disputes with you, landlords get in disputes with you. It's all generally it comes back to disputes over contracts and disputes over money is most of the lawsuits that I deal with. If you have to, it's one of those two avenues, and then it's just what it is.
Yeah. Have you ever had to deal with, because I know there's a lot of like husband-wife teams out there. Have you ever had to deal with a husband-wife team that was going through a partnership dispute, but not a divorce, or maybe also a divorce? Like, does that get extra messy, husband and wife teams?
Yeah, I've dealt with a lot of husband and wife teams, and I've seen some stuff, and I've been very frustrated during the process because I like to think I'm rational and I'm trying to advocate on behalf of their business as well
Mhm.
as their interests, but they just have their own agenda that they want to follow, and it's pretty difficult to get through. But that's even if they're not getting divorced. That's just if they have an argument over whatever, because then it's like a personality clash between the two of them, and you're kind of caught in the middle, and you're just trying to be like, do this for your business, and they're like, well, I have to be the right one. So it's it's a very
Yeah,
weird
I
position to
can
be in.
imagine.
Try to handle it the best you can.
I can imagine. Okay, so going back to the business life cycle that we were going through. So let's say the next stage, they're starting to scale, and now they're looking to possibly acquire smaller entities and bolt those on. Um, when you've worked with clients who are doing that, trying to be the acquirer, what are some of the like common issues that they may run into there, mistakes that they may make in that scaling process through acquisition?
It's probably 100% due diligence on knowing what they're buying,
Yeah.
because you may think you're getting one thing and you're really getting something totally different. It's always when you're the buyer in a business deal, whether you're buying to add on to your company or you're buying an investment or whether you're going into business to buy something, you always have to do due diligence to make sure you fully understand what it is you're getting yourself into. And you want to make sure that you have the right people scrutineer the documents that they're trying to put forward, showing you like what their revenues are, what their cash flow is, what their deficits are, what their liabilities are, and make sure that it's all 100% accurate, because it could be, accounting tricks and all kinds of other things that people do to puff up what their worth is versus what, it actually is. So it's always amount before you even get into the process of doing it. It's always background due diligence. That's probably the most important thing to do once when you're the acquiring party. And then you want to make sure that both sides are represented by two sets of attorneys. Like I represent the
Mm.
buyer, someone else represents the seller, and vice versa. A lot of people try
Mhm.
to get away with doing El Cheapo and try to have one attorney do both sides, which you can do if you get a conflict waiver, but it's really not good. And it's much better to invest the money in having an attorney
Yeah.
represent each side in a deal, because it's both sides will just lay blame on the attorney for something going wrong or whatever, versus laying blame on the other side or themselves if something goes wrong. So just a lot of that stuff. The due diligence is the main part, but making sure everything's done formally, just like, you set up your business correctly and everything. You make sure you transact the business correctly. You make sure all your sales documents are correct and you have the right kind of deal. If it's an asset purchase, you make sure you do the asset purchase correct and you list every single asset there is, even down to, a salt packet or a spoon or a fork at a restaurant. You get it down to as nitty gritty as possible. Or if it's a business organization takeover, you have to make sure that, there's actual physical stock certificates or um, uh, membership certificates that actually
Mhm.
change hands in order to do it correctly. So it's just,
Yeah.
again, preventative stuff and due diligence is for the most part what you have to do.
How involved, that makes a ton of sense. How involved do you get as the attorney in the actual like negotiation of the acquisition on behalf of your
I
clients,
don't,
or
I try not to get involved in any of the negotiation stuff, or at
Mhm.
least the grand scheme of things. Like that's up to my
Yeah.
client and, their
Yeah.
business broker, if they have one or whatever, to figure out all the global terms. I'll get involved when it comes down to the nitty gritty and the compliance stuff, like when somehow they want to transfer this to that, but I'm like, you can't wave a magic wand and make it happen. There's actual things that you need to put into process and do things. Like for instance, one major, for lack of a better term, pain in the ass is when you represent, like I represent a lot of people who buy and sell like restaurants. Okay. So the liquor license, no matter what state you're located in, is like witchcraft. It's like total its own separate thing. No one really understands. And you have liquor license specialists, liquor license sales thing. It's like the Willy Wonka golden ticket. Okay. And every single jurisdiction is different, but all of them have special things with liquor licenses. So to transfer them is, I'm not going to say hard, but it's, at least in Florida, it's, you can't just say I transfer my liquor license to you. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes in there, and you have to counsel the buyer and the seller on like, yeah, I understand you want to buy the business and you're going to get the liquor license, but there's like 10 steps that go into that. It's not just like we show up at the closing and you sell your sales certificate and it's done. There's like, 10 compliance steps that go into that. And it's also the same thing with like utilities and rent and other things like that.
Yeah. Okay. And so then I guess the final stage we could say is exit. So now your client is trying to sell their business. Do you approach that differently than when they are the acquirer themselves, or is it largely the same sort of thing from your perspective?
It's mostly the same, to make sure that, it's mostly, I think it is mostly the same, but it's also, you want to make sure that they did their due diligence as sellers and that they had all their documents in place. They complied with corporate formalities, actually did things correctly, and, segregated money and didn't mix money and didn't, run the business like a hobby, and that they complied with all their documents and that all their stuff is in order to sell, like they have a complete inventory or list of assets or things like that. Or if it's going to be a business organization transfer, that they actually have like a corporate book or things like that. And they actually have like stock and membership certificates, because it's a lot easier to do that than to just say you did it on paper. It's a lot easier to hand over your corporate book. And it's a lot easier to hand over like your 100 shares in the company than it is to say, oh, well, we did it, but there really aren't 100 shares, but there are, but it's only in theory. So you want to make sure all that stuff's in place to do, because it makes it a lot easier, and the formalities will protect you if something goes wrong. Because then, like for instance, on a stock transfer, let's say it's just a business of like 100 shares, right? If you don't physically have 100 shares of stock to transfer, and you just metaphorically say, well, I transfer 100 shares of stock to you. Okay, well, how did that transfer happen? Like, was it when you signed the document? Was it real? Was it not? And then it gets into whole kinds of weird theoretical problems and things like that. So that's why you just have to, again, be compliant and follow formalities.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you said earlier, when it comes to like, the terms of a purchase or a sale of a business or whatever, you try to leave the business owner to work with their broker to sort of get that done and come up with at least the, very high level terms. When it comes to the actual sale agreement in this situation, right? Your client is selling their business. So they've come to their high level terms, with the buyer, with the brokers, whatever. And then all of a sudden they get this sale agreement or this purchase agreement or whatever. I'm sure you're going through that and looking at that for them. Have you ever found anything crazy in those that like the other party was like trying to sneak into the contract and screw over your client? Does that happen?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't review the contract, I mean, they'll put whatever they want in there and just be like, oh, I'm sorry, I cut and pasted from another document, or, oh, that wasn't supposed to be in there. So, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of weird terms that I've seen in documents for, sale or transfer documents that have been in there, as far as like, ongoing revenue things and like having a security interest in the stuff in case the deal falls through. So yeah, that's why no matter if you're involved with like a business broker or whatever, you still want an attorney to be able to review all those documents, because that stuff does happen, whether it's intentionally or, oops, I cut and pasted something, I'm sorry, kind of thing.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Awesome. Well, I want to start wrapping up here. Is in my opinion, that's kind of the entire life cycle. Did I miss anything in the life cycle of a business? Is there anything else you would want to hit on there?
No, just, like I said, it begins actually before you think it begins with the pre-business
Yeah.
cycle of getting your written business plan together. And then I think we covered pretty much the genesis, the formation, going through things, making sure everything's compliant at all times, and then selling or winding it down. I mean, winding maybe another area is if
Mm,
you just want to get rid of the business, you don't want to sell it or anything. Again,
yeah.
another thing where you have to make sure you comply with all formalities and going out of business. And there's a
Hmm.
whole set of laws and a whole bunch of things that talk about how you wind down a business. And
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you do that correctly so that somehow you don't become individually liable for corporate debt or for LLC debt or for partnership debt.
Ah, yeah. That sounds like a really good warning, actually.
Yeah,
Okay.
because like
Awesome.
some people just think they can go out of business by not filing their corporate report for the next year, and then
Mm,
that's like, oh, I'm out of business. Well, no, you didn't file a corporate report. Legally, the entity is inactive, but it's still in business. You have to take
yeah.
steps to put it out of business.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's so much when it comes to the law that, myself and many other entrepreneurs out there are just not up to speed on and probably never going to take the time to get up to speed on it. And I mean, that is why it is so important to have a really knowledgeable attorney on your team to make sure every step of the way, you're papered up and you're safe and you're secure and protected and all that stuff. So sounds like you're one of those guys. And I appreciate you coming on, Matthew. We're going to link to your website, fornarolegal.com. So if anybody wants to go to that, that's probably the best way to get in touch with you, I would think. And I think you also have like resources on there for them too, if they want to, read a little bit about different things. Is that right?
Yeah, I have a bunch of stuff on my website as far as like blogs, white papers, videos, all kinds of things on there that answer a lot of general questions for businesses.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Well, we will link to that. And otherwise, Matthew, thank you very much for joining me in the Lion's Den.
All right. Thank you, Nico. I enjoyed being here.